A room packed with faces you've known for years, suddenly frozen in disbelief. My husband, the man I'd trusted for over a decade, stands before everyone we know, raising his champagne glass like a weapon. His voice cuts through the celebratory air. Allison can't give me children. We're done. And I want you all to meet Lindsay. She's carrying my baby. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the sound of a life shattering in real time. But here's what he didn't see coming. I didn't shed a single tear. Instead, I reached into my purse and placed 3 documents on the table. The house deed he'd promised his mistress, DNA results proving the child wasn't his, and the company transfer papers he thought he controlled. My name is Allison. I'm 39, a financial executive in Austin, Texas. And if you've ever wondered what it looks like when someone tries to destroy you but accidentally hands you the blueprints to their own downfall, stay with me. Because what happened next will leave you speechless. Drop a comment if betrayal has ever knocked on your door. Hit like if you believe karma keeps perfect records. And subscribe, because this story is just getting started, and trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. I used to believe my marriage was solid. Not fairy tale perfect, but real. Ethan swept into my world at a Dallas financial conference when I was climbing the ladder as a budget supervisor at a private hospital network. He'd just broken free from his family's empire, hungry to build something of his own. Everything about him screamed ambition, the southern charm, the way he made you feel like the only person in the room, that magnetic confidence I mistook for strength. 8 months later, we were married. Looking back, it seems reckless. I was almost 28. He was 33 and spoke about building a family with such conviction that I believed every word. I told him we'd need to wait until my career stabilized. He smiled and said we had all the time in the world. The first 9 years felt like flipping through a book I couldn't put down. Beautiful chapters interrupted by blank pages. Then something shifted. His family's warmth turned ice cold. Every holiday gathering became an interrogation. My mother-in-law Barbara would lock eyes with me across the table. So, Allison, anything new this year? Besides your career, obviously. One Thanksgiving, she looked straight through me and declared, "A childless woman has nothing worth celebrating." I forced a smile. Ethan sat beside me, silent as stone, his eyes fixed on his plate. He didn't defend me, didn't even look at her. I told myself it was just old-fashioned thinking, harmless chatter from a different generation. But then I noticed the details. At every family event, I was seated at the far end of the table, physically separated from conversations about children, motherhood, soccer practices. Barbara's hallway gallery told the real story. Photos of Ethan surrounded by nieces and nephews, his cousins' children. Me? I'd been erased, cropped out like a mistake someone wanted to forget. One evening while washing dishes side by side, I finally broke the silence. "Are you ashamed of me?" He set down the glass with just enough force to make his feelings clear. "What are you talking about?" "Not having kids." "Me having to smile through your mother's comments." He exhaled sharply. "Mom's from a different era. Don't let it get to you." "But what about you, Ethan? How do you feel?" "Nothing. Just the sound of water running and the distance growing between us." That's when the doubt crept in like poison. I started wondering if something was fundamentally broken inside me. When that question began waking me at 3 a.m., I quietly scheduled an appointment at a fertility clinic. For 2 excruciating years, I became a human pincushion, vitamins, hormone injections, endless panels, cycle tracking, dietary overhauls, yoga classes, even acupuncture sessions in Round Rock from a specialist my friend swore by. All of it chasing a miracle that seemed to slip further away with each passing month. Then came the appointment that changed everything. I sat in that sterile office, gripping a paper cup of ice water, my heart hanging by a thread. "Allison, your numbers are completely normal. We've exhausted every avenue. You were, and still are, capable of conceiving." Were. That word landed like a punch. "So what are you saying?" "The issue isn't on your end. Your husband hasn't been tested yet." "I think it's time we insist on that." The room tilted. All this time, I'd been carrying the shame, the guilt, the weight of failure. Every sleepless night, every tear shed in locked bathrooms, every pitying glance I'd endured, none of it was because of me. Ethan had never taken the test, and I'd never been strong enough to demand it. That night I cooked his favorite meal, grilled salmon, perfectly seared. I poured wine, watched him eat in comfortable silence. I wanted to ask why. The words formed in my throat, but never made it past my lips. Finally, I whispered, "I'm stopping treatment." He glanced up. No surprise, no questions, no concern. Just a nod before returning to his plate. That's when I knew with absolute certainty. He'd always known. Ethan knew he was infertile. And he'd made the conscious choice to let me drown in guilt, to absorb his mother's cruelty, to carry blame that was never mine to bear. From that moment, I stopped trying to conceive. But I started something far more important. I started paying attention. The irregular withdrawals from our joint accounts. The lies about business trips. The way he avoided any discussion of our future. I didn't confront him. Didn't make dramatic accusations. I simply stepped back, observed, and waited. Because once someone lets you shoulder their shame, they'll have no hesitation about betraying you again. I wouldn't wait long. His mask was already beginning to crack. By late last year, Ethan's financial behavior had shifted in ways most people wouldn't notice. But I've spent nearly 2 decades dissecting accounting ledgers for entire hospital systems. Numbers don't hide from me once I start looking. An expensive sports watch here, first-class flights there, lavish restaurant charges from cities he'd supposedly visited alone. At first, I rationalized it. Maybe client gifts, relationship maintenance for big accounts. Then I stumbled on a receipt buried in our shared inbox, a wire transfer to a luxury jeweler in San Diego. One item, diamond necklace, Infinity Love Collection, $8,000. The date? A Tuesday when Ethan claimed he had strategy meetings in Houston. I didn't confront him. Confrontation requires certainty, and I needed ironclad proof. I hired Martin, a retired financial crimes detective running his own firm in Austin, someone who specialized in unmasking liars. He didn't ask questions, just said quietly, "Give me his full name, license plate, and general schedule. I'll bring you the truth." 3 days later, Martin found the first thread. "Your husband's been systematically withdrawing cash from company accounts and funneling it through a shell nonprofit with zero operations." We met at a coffee shop. He slid a meticulously organized stack of photos across the table like a coroner presenting autopsy results on a dying marriage. Primary recipient, Lindsay Mayer, 24 years old. Interned at his firm last summer. Now runs her own design studio downtown. I studied the first photo. Lindsay stepping out of a new SUV, designer sunglasses perched on her head, carrying a limited edition Chanel bag. Young, polished, pretty in that calculated way, but her eyes, they knew exactly what she was holding. Martin laid out more evidence. Plane tickets to Bozeman, Montana. Booked under Ethan Caldwell and Lindsay Mayer. They're renting a lakeside cabin near Flathead every 2 weeks under an alias. Playing house like newlyweds. I leaned back in the cold wooden chair, staring at a photo of them holding hands outside a small grocery near the cabin. Ethan wore a baseball cap, sleeves casually rolled up. He looked younger, lighter, and Lindsay was cradling her belly. Pregnant, naturally, but what sent ice through my veins was Ethan's expression as he gazed at her stomach. I'd seen that look before, years ago when he touched my abdomen and asked hopefully, "Do you think this could be the month?" Martin sat in respectful silence, letting me process the verdict laid out before me. That night, I didn't go straight home. I drove aimlessly through downtown Austin, eventually finding myself at the old Marina District, on a wooden bridge overlooking the lake. I'd stood in this exact spot 5 years earlier, after a silent miscarriage no one knew about except me. Ethan was tied up in Dallas meetings. I didn't want to burden him. So I went to the hospital alone, signed the paperwork alone, and drove home alone. I used to think endurance was noble, that suffering in silence made me strong. But staring at those photographs, I understood something profound. Ethan hadn't just betrayed me with another woman. He'd betrayed 12 years of trust. He'd let me endure physical and emotional agony alone while he built an alternate life, funded by money I'd helped earn. The next morning I rose early as always. Made coffee for both of us, prepared breakfast, set the table, closed the garage door after he left. He had no idea I knew everything. And that's exactly how I wanted it. I began reviewing company files with fresh eyes. Ethan lacked financial acumen. I'd always managed payment transfers, investment decisions, shareholder documentation. But recently, he'd been skimming funds through shell companies. I documented every suspicious expense, every fraudulent invoice, building a comprehensive map of how Ethan had weaponized company resources to finance his double life. I also contacted my personal attorney, a college friend who now specializes in financial divorce strategy for entrepreneurs. I didn't elaborate, just forwarded the documents, an audio recording of Ethan calling Lindsay the only woman who truly understands me, and one simple question: how do I protect what's mine? Her response exceeded my expectations, but I didn't act immediately. I needed time to understand exactly who I was dealing with. Because if Ethan was calculating enough to fly his mistress to Montana bi-weekly, use company funds for jewelry and SUVs and lakeside villas, then I'd only scratched the surface. What I'd discovered was merely the tip of the iceberg, and I refused to drown anymore. I encountered Lindsay exactly once before the truth detonated. A small fundraiser hosted by a local healthcare organization. Ethan claimed he had meetings in San Antonio that day. But when I arrived as a primary donor, there he stood in the corner with a young blonde, both grinning for cameras. Lindsay wore a fitted pale blue dress, her hand resting delicately on her belly like she was broadcasting a secret. Ethan didn't notice me, but Lindsay did. Our eyes locked for precisely 3 seconds, long enough for her to identify me, long enough for me to recognize she wasn't someone who avoided confrontation. I didn't approach. Didn't speak. Just slipped out through the back exit. But I took something with me, a beige scarf draped carelessly over her chair. Her perfume clung to the fabric, light, sweet, youthful. I folded it carefully, tucked it into my purse, and told no one. 3 days later, hair samples from that scarf arrived at a private lab where I had personal connections. I requested DNA analysis to determine if Lindsay's baby shared genetic markers with Ethan. I included hair from his brush, collected one morning while he was traveling. The technician asked if I was certain I wanted these results. I simply nodded. 7 days of playing the perfect wife. Asking about dinner preferences, wishing him good night, making his coffee exactly how he liked it. But inside, I'd transformed. No longer a wife, an evidence collector. The results arrived on a Monday morning. A brief email. No genetic relationship detected between fetus and Mr. Caldwell's DNA sample. I read it repeatedly, each word carving new meaning into my understanding. That child wasn't Ethan's, and Ethan had no idea. I printed the report, secured it in my study safe, then opened my laptop to research Lindsay Mayer. I needed to know who this woman was, where she came from, why she'd crashed into my life like an uninvited actress claiming center stage. Born in a small town near Tulsa, Oklahoma. Parents divorced early. She'd dropped out of college, then returned for interior design. She'd interned unpaid for Ethan's company for 3 months. Immediately after that internship concluded, she somehow had capital to open her own design studio in downtown Austin, where rent never drops below 5 figures monthly. I found photos of them at a Miami conference. A trip never mentioned in any itinerary I'd seen. One social media post read, "New beginnings with my little family." Below it, a photo of her hand on her belly. No mention of Ethan, but in frame was a wristwatch I'd given my husband 3 years ago as an anniversary gift. Lindsay didn't know I knew. She kept calling Ethan the love of my life, kept posting ultrasound images, kept whispering sweet promises. And Ethan, foolish as a lovesick teenager, believed he was about to become a father. A week later, Martin reported that Ethan had just purchased a luxury condo near Zilker Park, jointly owned with Lindsay. I wasn't surprised. The picture was crystallizing. Lindsay didn't love Ethan. She was performing a role she believed would grant her access to wealth and status, not through talent, but through the baby growing inside her. And Ethan was too desperate, too hungry for redemption to question the most fundamental thing, whether the child was biologically his. I remembered the doctor's words about Ethan's fertility. The chances of him fathering a child naturally are essentially zero. Any conception would require medical intervention or a miracle. There was no miracle here, just naivete wrapped in ambition. Lindsay thought she was winning, that her growing belly was a golden ticket to wealth, status, and the title of legitimate wife. What she didn't know was I'd stopped playing the role of compliant spouse. I was now the architect of truth. I began archiving everything systematically. DNA results, financial documents, condo purchase agreements, even social media posts Lindsay deleted within hours. But I'd already captured screenshots. Each piece was part of a puzzle that, once assembled, would reveal the complete picture of greed, deception, and the profound foolishness of a man I'd once loved. My next phase unfolded in complete silence, like cleaning out a storage room my husband never bothered inspecting. Except this wasn't storage. This was the financial backbone of the company Ethan thought he ran, with me merely in the background providing support. On paper, we were co-founders. But everything that mattered, investment accounts, cash flow control, share transfer clauses, I'd built from day one. Ethan never had patience to read beyond 3 lines of any financial agreement. He'd always say, "I'm the visionary. You're the pilot." He was right. And when the pilot goes silent, the ship can change course without anyone noticing. I started by examining the parent company system I'd established 3 years ago during our healthcare expansion. That entity was registered under my name, operated independently, but held legal rights to invest in and acquire shares from the main firm. I'd originally built it for tax optimization and strategic fund protection. Now I deployed it as a net. Every payment, every percentage point, every profit slice held by the main company, gradually transferred into the parent company, quietly, legally, just intelligent investment restructuring, based on terms Ethan had signed without reading. Left enough profit visible so he wouldn't notice the shift. Ethan continued authorizing fund transfers as always, his mind preoccupied with financing a new mini-yacht for summer getaways. Meanwhile, each night after he fell asleep, I'd open my laptop and review investment lines like a dancer perfecting choreography on an aging stage. Simultaneously, I rewrote my will. No more Ethan, no more asset splitting like previous versions. Everything I owned, personal shares, private properties, individual investment funds, now designated to a new beneficiary, Emily. Emily is my sister Sarah's daughter. Sarah died from cancer 8 years ago. When she passed, Emily was only 11, curled up in a tiny black dress in the funeral home corner, clutching the bracelet her mother left behind. Our family shattered under grief, but I made a promise that day. Emily would never lack a single opportunity in life. I enrolled her in private school in Dallas, quietly covering tuition, housing, books. When she earned a communications scholarship at the University of Michigan, I attended her orientation. To her, I was Aunt Allison, the single, busy aunt who always showed up when it counted. She didn't know that every dinner, every bookstore visit came from a fund I'd quietly established years earlier, a survival plan for 2 abandoned women. My attorney, Karen, handled all paperwork for the new asset transfer. She's in her 60s, survived a brutal divorce from a federal judge, and possesses the kind of gaze no detail escapes. "Are you certain you want to remove Ethan entirely from your will?" she asked during final review. "Absolutely certain," I replied without hesitation. "What about joint assets?" "Everything jointly held. I've already rerouted through the parent company. Everything under my name, I legally protected last year when Ethan agreed to revise investment contracts during our funding round." Karen nodded. "Then I'll just need final bank verification to complete Emily's trust setup." "I already have it," I said, sliding over my personal fund statement. I left her office as afternoon light painted the sky. Driving home, I called Emily. "Perfect timing!" Her excited voice bubbled through. I got selected to represent our student media group. We're launching a podcast about real-life inspiring women. Will you be our first guest? You're the strongest woman I know. I paused before replying softly. I've never thought of myself as strong. Emily, I'm just learning how not to fall. That's exactly what strength is, she whispered. I ended the call pulling into the garage. Ethan wasn't home yet. On the dining table sat dinner, prepared out of habit, though I wasn't sure if it was duty or just maintaining the mask. But looking at it, I realized something profound. In every small action I still performed, I was slowly exiting his life. Like someone packing luggage while the other person never notices anything disappearing. I wasn't destroying things. I was dismantling them one layer at a time with the patience of someone who understood. The most valuable thing she owned wasn't property. It was time, and I'd started reclaiming it, one precious second at a time. That Wednesday afternoon, stepping out of a meeting with our senior accounting team, my phone rang. Unknown number, New York area code. Something in my gut warned me to answer. I picked up as I entered my office and shut the door. Hello, may I speak with Mrs. Allison Caldwell? Speaking, I answered, opening my laptop. Thank you for taking my call. I'm Douglas Lee, legal representative for Larkin & Company. We're managing an equity transaction involving your company. I froze, eyes locking on the screen. Larkin & Company, one of the East Coast's most aggressive venture capital firms, known for swooping in when founders were desperate or collapsing internally. Why are you calling me? Because your name appears in the eligibility clause required to complete this transaction. We've received transfer documentation for 48% of shares from Mr. Ethan Caldwell, co-founder. However, based on the original operating agreement, any equity transfer exceeding 15% requires your written consent. I closed my eyes, exhaled slowly. Something cold and razor-sharp settled in my chest. Can you send me that file? Of course. Please confirm a secure email. I provided my private address for high-level transactions, then ended the call with a curt thank you. Within 10 minutes, the email arrived. I scanned every page, every word. Ethan was attempting to sell nearly half the company's shares at 30% below market value. Worse, the buyer was a newly formed subsidiary legally registered under Lindsay Mayer's name. He was handing off the future value of a company I'd helped build to his mistress. He thought simply transferring ownership would prevent me from stopping it. He still believed I was just the quiet woman at the table, waiting for permission to speak. But Ethan had forgotten something critical. I'd drafted our original founding agreement 16 years ago. While he was busy building his personal brand, I sat with lawyers inserting protective clauses, including a control clause requiring both co-founders' written consent for any transfer above 15%. Without my signature, the deal was worthless. I opened my desk drawer, retrieved the original signed agreement sealed in an envelope. Clause 8.3. Any equity transfer exceeding 15% must be subject to written consent by both co-founders, notarized and recorded. I'd had it notarized during our first year. I replied to Douglas with a scanned excerpt and one sentence. I do not consent to any equity transfer involving Mr. Ethan Caldwell at this time. Please halt all proceedings immediately. Less than an hour later, Douglas called back. Thank you for your swift response. We're pausing all actions and will notify Mr. Caldwell that transfer conditions haven't been met. I appreciate your transparency, I said steadily, and I'd advise you to double-check any other assets before signing with Ethan. He might be attempting to sell things that don't belong to him. After hanging up, I sat in silence for a long while. I thought about how Ethan always assumed I lacked ambition, that I chose finance because it was safe and unflashy, that I didn't understand branding or visionary leadership. I used to stay quiet, letting him own the spotlight at shareholder meetings while I remained a shadow behind his tailored suits. But now he was trying to use the very foundation I'd built to create a new life for himself and his mistress. He'd forgotten I'd laid every brick of this system, every investment channel, every protective clause. I didn't need to shout. I just needed a signature. And I would never sign away betrayal. That evening when Ethan came home, he hung his coat as always and walked into the kitchen looking exhausted. Hungry? I asked without looking up. Yeah, a little. Back-to-back meetings all day. I poured him water, placed it on the table, then returned to cleaning cabinets. I said nothing about the call, the contract, or Lindsay. I wanted to see how long he'd keep lying. I wanted to give him one final chance to tell the truth. But when dinner ended and Ethan set down his glass with a weary sigh, I knew he'd say nothing. Because in his mind, I was still the woman who never knew anything. And that was his greatest mistake. I went to the bank on a weekday morning carrying a thick file, nearly 300 pages. Inside were copies of our company's founding agreement, recent financial statements, and a notarized power of attorney Karen had prepared. Paul Henderson, the deputy director handling high net worth clients, met with me. We'd worked together before during corporate restructuring, but today I brought a different request. We have joint accounts, personal and business, I said, opening the file. I want to temporarily freeze all accounts jointly held under Allison and Ethan Caldwell, based on financial risk prevention clauses and asset coordination control rights. Paul studied me, his expression shifting after a few seconds. You're implementing a dispute prevention measure. I'm preventing misuse of company funds before it's too late. I have evidence the other account holder is using funds for personal expenses unrelated to business operations. I have full legal grounds for this action. I handed over an additional letter from Karen requesting tighter control over all transactions linked to Ethan Caldwell's name. Paul didn't hesitate. He nodded, called an assistant, and the entire process completed within 30 minutes. Leaving the bank, I called Andrew Miller, an independent auditor who'd worked with me 3 years earlier. Andrew was meticulous, discreet, and impossible to influence. I left a simple message. I need you to investigate all expense-related transactions from Ethan's accounts over the past 2 years. Full legal audit format. As soon as possible. 3 days later, Andrew called back, his voice low and clear. I've completed the initial review. What I found is serious, Allison. I'm listening. At least 19 payments from company accounts to services not outlined in any contract. Luxury hotels, personal flight tickets, gift cards, suspicious charges to a jewelry store in San Diego. I wasn't surprised. But when Andrew continued, I finally saw the full extent of Ethan's recklessness. Most notable, a $25,000 advance listed as Media Partner Studio sponsorship and a $42,000 transfer to an account under Lindsay Mayer's name, labeled Product Development Costs. I leaned back, eyes drifting to the window. The Austin sky hung heavy and gray that day, clouds threatening cold rain. I took a deep breath. Can you prepare this in standard litigation format? Already done. I'll send it to your attorney's office by end of day. That afternoon, I sat with Karen in her quiet office, wind hissing softly through window frames. With transactions like these, Karen said, flipping through Andrew's report, we're absolutely positioned to send Lindsay Mayer a cease and desist letter for unlawful use of company funds. If she doesn't cooperate, I'll file a civil lawsuit immediately. I nodded. I don't want to destroy her life, but I need her to understand this isn't a game. Karen smirked, her gaze sharp as a blade. Women like her only take law seriously when it arrives on subpoena paper. The next morning, Lindsay received her first email from the legal office, outlining related transactions, receiving accounts, improper fund usage, and a firm recommendation to return the full amount within 7 days. It included a warning. Failure to comply would result in legal action for misappropriation of corporate funds, falsifying usage purposes, and aiding financial misconduct. I didn't wait long. By that afternoon, Martin texted. Lindsay had contacted a private attorney, appeared panicked, and was frantically trying to reach Ethan. They met at a discreet cafe in East Riverside. Martin sent me a photo. Lindsay hunched over, face pale, hands trembling as she opened her laptop. Ethan sat across from her, gripping the table edge, a look of unraveling control on his face. I stared at that photo for a long time. Not because I felt triumphant, but because I recognized that kind of disorientation. I'd once sat that way too, in front of a doctor holding test results that weren't even mine, but still changed my life's trajectory. The difference? I didn't chase anyone to salvage a life built on lies. Lindsay, on the other hand, was realizing the man she'd bet everything on had nothing but debt and empty promises. Everything she thought she could steal was completely out of reach, guarded by a woman she'd once considered invisible. I closed the laptop and glanced at the clock. Barbara's birthday party would happen in 3 days. Ethan still had no idea I knew everything. And Lindsay was beginning to learn this wasn't a two-player game. The most powerful piece had never left the board. I'd never enjoyed parties at Barbara's house. Too crowded, too performative, with an unspoken choreography that made me feel like a spectator in my own life. But today, I arrived with crystal-clear purpose. In the black leather purse beside me wasn't lipstick or a wallet. It was truth. Barbara's 60th birthday celebration took place in the banquet hall behind a high-end Italian restaurant, where olive oil and garlic perfumed the air the moment you entered. Nearly 70 guests filled the space. Family, longtime friends, Ethan and Barbara's former colleagues. White linens covered round tables, wine glasses sparkled, laughter floated through the room. I sat to Ethan's left, smiled politely, greeted approaching guests, and checked the time periodically. I knew exactly what he planned to do. I knew because I had a recording, captured without his knowledge, where his voice outlined the plan like just another calendar event. Your mom's birthday is the perfect moment. Everyone will be there. I'll announce the split publicly. Allison won't make a scene in front of Barbara. 18 minutes after the birthday cake arrived and the last note of happy birthday faded, Ethan stood. He raised his glass, gently tapped it with a silver spoon, like he was preparing to offer grateful toast. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to the son Barbara was so proud of. He smiled, scanning faces with practiced charm. I just want to thank everyone for being here to celebrate with our family today. But I also have something important to share. I placed my hand on the purse, feeling the papers inside, their weight steady in my palm. After many years together, Allison and I have decided to go our separate ways, Ethan said, voice calm and composed like announcing a corporate merger. We no longer share the same vision. I'm grateful for the time we had. Whispers rippled through the room like waves. And today, I'd like to introduce someone who's given me new hope for a real family. This is Lindsay. Gasps scattered through the crowd. Lindsay stood from a back table, hand resting proudly on her stomach. Her wine-red dress was too bold for a 60-year-old's birthday party, but she clearly hadn't come to blend in. Barbara turned toward me, brow furrowed, surprised but not disapproving. For her, as long as there was a baby, a continuation of bloodline, it didn't matter who carried it, as long as it wasn't me. Ethan looked ready to continue, but I'd already risen. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of that room. Thank you, Ethan. You're right. Today is important. But not for the reason you just announced. I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick cream-colored envelope, placing it gently before him. Then I opened the flap. This is Ethan Caldwell's medical report, I said, eyes locked on my ex-husband's face. Doctor's conclusion, complete infertility, unable to father children without medical intervention. The murmuring stopped abruptly. Ethan's face drained of color. And this, I continued, extracting another file, is a DNA test conducted using the pregnant woman's hair sample and Ethan's genetic profile. Conclusion, no biological relationship. Lindsay stepped backward, her hand falling from her belly. I didn't stop. And here, I presented another folder, is a business contract, the attempted share transfer Ethan processed in secret, naming Lindsay Mayer. Unfortunately, it holds zero legal weight because final veto rights belong to me. And I never signed. No one spoke. I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioner above us. And finally, I pulled a small USB drive from my inner jacket pocket. I have a recording from a private internal meeting between Ethan and Lindsay. Exact quote, "I only married Allison because she had money. Now she's old and can't have kids, so I need to start over." I didn't need to play the recording. Ethan's eyes confirmed everything. In that moment, He turned toward Lindsay as if begging for help, but she stared back with nothing but disbelief. No one in that room spoke. Even Barbara turned away, her hand trembling as she clutched her water glass, unable to process the truth. I gathered the documents neatly, placing them back in my bag. "I came here to wish Barbara a happy birthday," I said, looking straight at the woman who'd never hidden her contempt for me. "Thank you for giving me the perfect moment to tell the truth." Then I walked out, my heels echoing slowly across marble floors. I didn't look back, because from that moment forward, I was leaving behind not just a broken marriage, but every lie I'd ever been forced to accept as truth. Just as I stepped into the hallway, a loud crash erupted behind me, followed by frantic whispers and a shrill voice slicing through tension-soaked air. "You think I'm some kind of idiot, Ethan?" I didn't need to turn around to know what had happened. Lindsay had realized she had nothing left to protect. As documents I'd revealed passed from hand to hand, curious looks transformed into shock, then silence. A man once invited to speak at business summits, once toasted at family events as a model of honor, now stood shaking, gripping the table edge like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Lindsay stepped forward without hesitation. The red dress she'd worn like a victory banner now looked like a bloodstain cutting through the frozen crowd. She raised her hand. The slap rang out loud enough for me to hear from the hallway. All eyes turned. Ethan staggered, clutching his cheek, stunned. Lindsay, breathing hard, nearly screamed. "You told me to wear nice heels and fancy makeup to make a great first impression. And this is what you brought me to?" Ethan flailed, voice cracking. "It's just a misunderstanding. Allison fabricated all this out of jealousy because she knows she can't have kids." Lindsay snapped, eyes blazing. "So you knew you were infertile and still let me call you the father of a baby you knew wasn't yours?" Ethan's mouth hung open, speechless. The entire room froze like glass. "And the money, all of it, the mansion, the yacht, the condo, the cars, they weren't even yours, and yet you walked around like some kind of king." Lindsay scoffed, then spun on her heel, stilettos pounding. Tile like final blows to Ethan Caldwell's shattered reputation. No one stopped her. No one dared. The very people who'd once praised Ethan now avoided his gaze like his shame might be contagious. A man publicly exposed at a party, abandoned by his mistress, laid bare by his ex-wife. There wasn't much of him left anyone wanted to remember. Ethan looked toward me as if grasping for even a sliver of sympathy, but I'd already left that room behind, leaving him with exactly the game he thought he'd been controlling. I got a text as I reached my car from Barbara's old housekeeper. "Miss Allison, Barbara fainted after Lindsay stormed out. The whole family's in chaos." I smirked, not out of satisfaction, but because I knew what really brought that woman to her knees wasn't her son's disgrace. It was a sentence whispered by her oldest friend, standing behind her when I'd shown the house ownership papers. "Barbara, you said Ethan owned the house. But this deed says Allison. You told us you made him force her to waive all marital claims." "Exactly." 10 years ago, when Ethan and I purchased the house in West Austin, Barbara insisted I sign a document relinquishing joint ownership because she wanted to preserve the family estate. Ethan had agreed, saying it only required my name on a small section of the deed. But I, being a finance professional, quietly prepared a reverse transfer agreement, officially notarized and filed separately, that shifted full ownership to me 2 years later when Ethan needed to use the property as collateral for a personal loan. That document was never revoked. That house no longer belonged to Ethan. And Barbara, in that moment of collapse, understood everything. I could still hear her voice from years ago, sneering at me across the dinner table. A woman who can't bear children or keep a man shouldn't expect to keep a house. Now she was the one who'd lost everything. At what was supposed to be her moment of triumph, her son became a public disgrace. Her ex-daughter-in-law commanded the room's silence, and the mistress she'd quietly supported walked out without a backward glance. Ethan had nothing remaining. No wife, no mistress, no company, no home, and worst of all, no dignity. I sat in the car, hands on the wheel, watching late afternoon light spill across the windshield. It wasn't over yet. But in that quiet moment, I knew I'd reclaimed something I'd once lost, my place in this life. And no one, neither Ethan nor Barbara, would ever take that from me again. The courtroom was unusually packed that morning, not chaotic or noisy, just tense. I sat at the left table with Karen, my hands resting on neatly tabbed files categorized by subject, finances, assets, corporate activity, violations, all supported by notarized evidence. Ethan arrived 5 minutes late, accompanied by a young, frazzled-looking lawyer, clearly not his first pick. That man, my ex-husband, looked gaunt, chin covered in patchy stubble, shirt slightly wrinkled at the shoulders. Nothing remained of the man who'd given speeches about real family just weeks earlier. The judge was Eleanor Hughes, a woman in her 60s with short gray hair, dark-rimmed glasses, and eyes sharp as glass. As she entered and called the session to order, I caught a flicker in her gaze. Not bias, but quiet recognition, like she'd known who I was before I even spoke. Karen leaned in and whispered, "She's Julia's mom, the woman you helped last year escape financial abuse because of your independence planning advice." I didn't answer, just nodded slightly, sitting a little taller, as if that truth had just added steel to my spine. The hearing began with Ethan's side presenting. His lawyer fumbled through hastily copied documents, trying to argue that company assets were shared property and Ethan's stock transfers were for the firm's benefit. But when Judge Hughes asked for the original founding contract detailing ownership rights, they had nothing. Karen didn't waste a moment. She stood, walked to the center of the courtroom, and held up the original company formation contract, signed by both parties and notarized 13 years ago. I watched Judge Hughes review Clause 8.3, the one I'd read repeatedly, night after night, memorized in the palm of my hand. "The veto clause," Karen said clearly. "Any transfer of more than 15% of company shares requires signed approval from both co-founders, notarized and filed with the Texas State Business Coordination Office. Mr. Ethan Caldwell transferred 48% of shares to a third party without Mrs. Allison Caldwell's consent. Supporting evidence," Karen continued, "includes the signed contract between Ethan and Lindsay Mayer, a forensic financial audit report, and documentation of non-transparent receiving accounts." Ethan started to rise, as if to object, but Judge Hughes raised her hand for silence. "I will allow the plaintiff to complete her statement. Mr. Caldwell, you'll have your turn to respond." Karen moved to the second point, misuse of company assets for personal purposes. She displayed detailed bank transactions, accounting software, screenshots, hotel receipts, jewelry invoices, flight tickets, none falling under approved expenses. Even if we generously assumed these were personal costs, using company funds without financial authorization violates corporate ethics and subjects him to civil liability. I remained silent. There was no need to interrupt. The truth was speaking for me. Judge Hughes flipped through files, quietly reviewing each page. After several minutes, she looked up, her gaze landing squarely on Ethan. "Mr. Caldwell, do you have any evidence these transactions were legitimate? Any internal company documentation? Confirming them?" Ethan's lawyer mumbled something incoherent and handed over a document without a signature. Judge Hughes didn't even bother looking closely. "I've worked with enough companies to recognize an invalid ledger," she said plainly. Karen continued with the final section. Personal assets. The Austin home, retirement accounts, emergency funds, all clearly listed, notarized, and lawfully owned. Most of it was my own hard-earned savings from 12 years of relentless work, protected by prior legal agreements. "Specifically," Karen said, We asked the court to formally recognize that the Austin home is not part of the marital property split, as the deed was fully transferred to Mrs. Allison 3 years ago, notarized and used as collateral for her personal credit trust. Ethan jumped up again. She forced me to sign. She tricked me. Still, I said nothing. I simply looked at him, the man who'd once convinced me to sell my first shares to build a dream together, now flailing in a system he thought would always be his to control. The hearing stretched on for over an hour. Once all evidence had been presented, Judge Hughes sat quietly for a long moment, then tapped her gavel. The court recognizes Mrs. Allison Caldwell retains full legal ownership of company shares and is entitled to continue managing and controlling all corporate assets. Mr. Ethan Caldwell has no further financial claim and is barred from using the title of co-founder in any public dealings. As for personal property, she continued, the court affirms Mrs. Allison's legal ownership of the Austin residence, all retirement accounts, and her individual investments. Mr. Caldwell shall retain only his existing personal possessions and a limited support stipend for 3 months. Ethan slumped back into his chair, his posture no longer carrying the confidence it had when he walked in. I stood, bowed slightly to Judge Hughes, and met her eyes. There was softness in them. You did the right thing, not just for yourself. I didn't reply, but I knew deep down that what she said wasn't just a judge's acknowledgement. It was the quiet validation of a mother who'd once watched her daughter escape something similar. I walked out of the courtroom, not feeling victorious, but simply as someone who'd reclaimed what was always mine. Ethan remained behind, head down, eyes staring into nothing, as if he'd just lost everything. And perhaps for the first time in his life, he finally understood what that felt like, having no voice left in a life he thought he controlled. I moved back into the house that had once been a silent battlefield between me and Ethan. But it wasn't a fortress preserving something rotten. It was a space reborn, filled with sunlight, the scent of citrus oil, and the sound of Emily's laughter echoing from the kitchen every morning. I formally adopted Emily 3 weeks after the trial. On paper, she still listed me as Aunt Allison, but when the lawyer read aloud her new name, Emily Caldwell, I felt her small hand squeeze mine tightly, a silent thank you. She'd just turned 21, in her final year of communications at the University of Michigan. Though no longer a child, she found in me a safe place, just as I'd once longed for in my sister. Are you scared to enter a family no one would call normal? I asked one night as we ate ice cream together on the balcony. Emily laughed softly. People always say normal isn't real. It's just a mask hiding things no one's dared to uncover. This place feels real, and I've never seen anyone live more honestly than you do, Mom. The word Mom slipped from her lips so gently, but for me, it was the affirmation of an entire journey no one had witnessed from the outside. I opened a free financial counseling center in March and called it the New Leaf Foundation. It occupied a small white building near the east side, the same area where I'd started my career. I didn't choose that location because rent was cheap. I chose it because I wanted to begin again in the place where I'd once looked at my life with nothing but fear and doubt. Each week we met with around 30 women, some recently divorced, some financially abused, some just lost and unsure how to start over. I didn't give lectures. I sat beside them, combed through bank statements, mortgage applications, tangled emails they brought in like bundles of frayed wires. I didn't hand them shortcuts. I offered light, a reminder that the road might be long, but it would never be a dead end. One afternoon in late April, I received a call from a journalist at Forbes Women. Her name was Claire Yamada, her voice soft but firm. We're running a feature on women who've rebuilt their lives after financial and marital collapse. Your name came up in a private forum. We'd like to interview you. I hesitated, but Emily encouraged me. You don't have to tell your story to be admired. You tell it so someone out there knows they're not alone. The article went live 2 weeks later with the headline, Allison Caldwell. From betrayed wife to symbol of American female independence. The photo of me standing in front of the center, arms loosely crossed, eyes looking forward, was shared hundreds of thousands of times in just 3 days. Letters poured in from everywhere. A teacher in Seattle, a single mom in Mississippi, a college graduate in New York. They wrote that they'd never dared to walk away until they read my story. I never thought I'd done anything extraordinary. I just chose not to bow my head. The last news I heard about Ethan came in early summer. I was making ginger tea for a woman who'd just left an 8-year controlling relationship when my phone rang. It was Karen, her voice tight, as if holding back mixed emotions. Ethan was arrested this morning. It has nothing to do with you. His former company filed charges for accounting fraud from when he was CEO. There are also federal money laundering allegations. No word yet on sentencing, but he'll be held during the investigation. I was quiet. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Better than ever," I said. And I wasn't lying. When I stood on the TEDx stage in September, the lights were so bright I couldn't see anyone's face. But I could feel them all leaning forward, breathing in sync. They didn't come for a lesson. They came for a life story. And I told it. Not polished, not shouted, just as if I were rewriting diary pages once stolen from my hands. People ask, "Me?" I said in closing. "Did getting revenge make me happy?" I paused for a few seconds, letting the question settle into silence. I tell them no. But it was the final key that unlocked the door so I could walk out of the golden cage I once helped build. The applause came like waves, but I couldn't make out individual claps. What I heard most clearly was my own heartbeat. Steady, unshaken, strong, like the woman I'd finally become. No longer someone's wife. No longer standing in anyone's shadow. Just me, Allison Caldwell, and the new life unfolding one step at a time with the very legs I'd used to stand through every storm. What do you think of my story? If you've ever stood at a crossroads, been judged for your silence, or had to rebuild from what felt like rock bottom, share your thoughts below. Sometimes a single voice can lighten someone else's burden. Family life isn't always what we hope for, but every brave step deserves to be heard. If you want to keep following true stories of healing, of reclaiming yourself, of walking through fire and coming out whole, hit that subscribe button. Because here we believe that every story is a doorway to the strength within us.